The lawyer's hands trembled as he slid the envelope across the mahogany table. Inside that cream-colored paper lay my grandfather's final wishes. Wishes that would destroy the only family I'd ever known. "Before any of you receives a single dollar," the lawyer said, his voice barely above a whisper, "every person in this room must submit to a DNA test. No exceptions. Those are the terms." My mother's face went ghost white. My Uncle Desmond dropped his coffee cup, the porcelain shattering into 1,000 pieces on the hardwood floor. And my Aunt Celeste? She simply stood up and walked toward the door, her designer heels clicking like a countdown to doomsday. I should have known then. I should have understood that Grandpa Thaddeus didn't make random demands. The man had built a shipping empire from nothing, had survived wars and recessions, had buried a wife and 2 children. Every decision he made carried weight, carried purpose. But I was too focused on the number the lawyer had just mentioned. $47 million, split among the family. 47 million reasons to take a simple DNA test. How could something so routine shatter everything I'd ever believed about my blood, my name, my very existence? I'm Evangeline Thorne, and this is the story of how a dying man's final request revealed that my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies so profound, so devastating, that by the end, I wouldn't even recognize the woman staring back at me from the mirror. The Thorne estate smelled like old money and older secrets. I'd grown up running through these halls, playing hide-and-seek in rooms larger than most people's homes, eating Sunday dinners in a dining room that seated 24. Every corner held a memory. Grandpa teaching me chess by the fireplace, my cousins and I sneaking cookies from the kitchen, Christmas mornings that felt like something from a fairy tale. Now, 3 days after the funeral, we'd all returned for the reading of the will. The September rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the world outside into a watercolor painting of grays and darker grays. Inside, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother, Isadora, sat ramrod straight in her chair, her pearls catching the light from the crystal chandelier. She'd barely spoken since Grandpa died. They'd had a complicated relationship. What daughter doesn't with a father who demands perfection? But I knew she loved him fiercely. Uncle Desmond paced near the bookshelves, his expensive suit rumpled, his face flushed. He'd flown in from Singapore, where he ran the Asian division of Thorne Shipping. "This is absurd," he muttered for the 3rd time. "Absolutely absurd." Aunt Celeste had returned to her seat after her dramatic exit, but her jaw was clenched so tight I worried she'd crack a tooth. Her twin daughters, Nicolette and Gianna, sat on either side of her like bookends, their faces mirror images of confusion. My younger brother Emery slouched in the corner, earbuds in, pretending none of this concerned him. At 19, he'd perfected the art of teenage indifference, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. And then there was me, 27 years old, working as a documentary filmmaker, always the observer, always behind the camera. I'd been filming a project in Kenya when I got the call about Grandpa. I'd flown 30 hours straight to make it to the funeral. The lawyer, Mr. Ashford, cleared his throat. He was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too many family fortunes tear families apart. "I understand this is unusual," he said carefully. "But Mr. Thorne was quite clear. The DNA tests must be administered by an independent laboratory. The results will be sealed and delivered only to me. Once I verify the results, the will can be executed." "Verify what, exactly?" Celeste's voice was sharp as broken glass. That we're all related? That seems rather obvious, doesn't it? Mr. Ashford's expression didn't change. I'm not at liberty to discuss Mr. Thorne's reasoning. I can only tell you that if anyone refuses the test, they forfeit their inheritance entirely. Additionally, the entire estate will be frozen until all parties comply. So we're being blackmailed, Desmond said flatly, by a dead man. Think of it as a condition, Mr. Ashford replied. No different than if he'd required everyone to complete a year of charity work or obtain a master's degree. It's his estate. He has the right to distribute it as he sees fit. My mother finally spoke, her voice hollow. When? The mobile laboratory will arrive tomorrow at 9 a.m. It's a simple cheek swab. Results typically take 3 to 5 business days. Mr. Ashford stood, gathering his papers. I suggest you all use this evening to consider your options. I'll be staying at the guest house if anyone has questions. After he left, the room erupted. This is insane! Nicolette jumped to her feet. Grandpa obviously wasn't in his right mind. We should contest and tie up the estate in court for years? Desmond interrupted. That's exactly what he'd want us to avoid. He built this company with his bare hands. He wouldn't want us destroying it over legal fees. Then what do you suggest? Celeste demanded. We take the damn test, Desmond said. It's a cheek swab. What's the worst that could happen? The silence that followed that question felt ominous. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I'm doing it. I don't know why Grandpa wanted this, but he's never steered me wrong before. If he thought it was important, it was important. My mother's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes, so like my own, or so I'd always thought, were filled with something I'd never seen before. Fear. Evangeline, she whispered. Maybe we should talk first. Privately. About what? She opened her mouth, closed it, shook her head. Nothing. Never mind. You're right. We should trust him. But the way she released my wrist, the way she turned away, the tremor in her shoulders, it all told me that my mother knew something that terrified her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the estate, walking past portraits of Thornes going back 6 generations. There was great-great-grandfather Augustus, who'd started the shipping company in 1887. Great-grandmother Theodora, who'd survived the San Francisco earthquake. Grandfather Thaddeus in his Navy uniform, young and handsome and unbroken by the losses that would come later. And there, in the gallery of more recent photos, was my favorite picture of Grandpa and me. I was 7 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, sitting on his shoulders at the harbor. He'd taken me to see the ships that day, let me climb aboard the flagship of the fleet, told me that one day, if I worked hard enough, I could captain my own life just like those vessels captained the seas. Choose your own course, Evie, he'd said, using the nickname only he called me. Don't let anyone else hold your compass. I touched the frame, my reflection ghosting over the glass. What course had I chosen? Documentary filmmaking had taken me around the world, but I'd always come back here, to this estate, to this family, to the bedrock certainty of who I was. A Thorne, built on generations of strength, resilience, success. Tomorrow, I'd take a DNA test and prove it. I had no idea that 24 hours from now, that certainty would be ash. Before we continue to Chapter 2, I need to know, are you still with me? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you want to see how this family's darkest secret destroys everything they've built, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next? Nobody sees it coming. Not the family, not me,
Not even Grandpa in his grave. Share this with someone who loves a story that'll keep them up at night. Trust me.
You'll want someone to discuss this with when the truth comes out. The mobile laboratory looked like something from a science fiction film. All sleek surfaces and humming equipment packed into what was essentially a luxury RV. 2 technicians in crisp white coats waited inside, their professionalism doing nothing to ease the dread pooling in my stomach. I'd arrived early, before the rest of the family. The morning was clear, the storm from yesterday having scrubbed the sky clean. Everything smelled fresh, new, reborn. I didn't yet understand the irony. Ms. Thorne? The first technician, a woman with kind eyes and efficient movements, smiled at me. We're ready whenever you are. This won't take more than a minute. The cheek swab was anticlimactic. A cotton stick against the inside of my mouth, a few practiced motions, and it was done. She placed the sample in a sealed tube, labeled it with a barcode, and logged it into her system. That's it? I asked. That's it. Results will go directly to Mr. Ashford within 3 to 5 business days. I stepped out of the laboratory van and nearly collided with my brother Emery. He looked terrible. Bloodshot eyes, pale skin, the kind of exhaustion that comes from a sleepless night. You okay? I asked. He shrugged, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. This whole thing is weird, right? Like, really weird? Grandpa was always unconventional. Unconventional is wearing mismatched socks. This is... He trailed off, watching as Uncle Desmond's car pulled up. Do you think he knew something we don't? Who? Grandpa. About the family. Emery's voice dropped lower. Last time I saw him, like 2 months ago, he seemed, I don't know, sad? He kept looking at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how. Before I could respond, Desmond was striding toward us, all business despite the existential absurdity of what we were about to do. Morning. Let's get this circus over with. One by one, the family submitted to the test. Nicolette and Gianna went together, holding hands like they had when they were little girls afraid of the dark. Celeste took longer, arguing with the technicians about privacy protocols until Desmond threatened to drag her inside himself. The last to arrive was my mother. She pulled up in her silver Mercedes just as the rest of us were heading inside for breakfast. Through the windshield, I could see her gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She sat there for a full minute before finally emerging, moving like a woman walking to her execution. Mom? I called out. She didn't seem to hear me. She walked past, her gaze fixed on the laboratory van, her face carved from marble. I started to follow, but Emery grabbed my arm. Let her go. Whatever's happening with her, she needs to work it out herself. He was right, but that didn't stop the worry from gnawing at me. Inside, Cook had prepared enough food to feed an army. Fresh pastries, fruit, eggs, bacon, coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead. No one had much appetite. We pushed food around our plates and made stilted conversation about nothing that mattered. When my mother finally joined us, she looked smaller somehow, diminished. She took the seat next to me but didn't meet my eyes. All done, she said quietly. Now we wait. The waiting was the worst part. 3 days felt like 3 years. I tried to focus on work, reviewing footage from my Kenya project, responding to emails, planning my next documentary. But my mind kept drifting back to that test, to my mother's fear, to Emery's observation about Grandpa's sadness. On the second day, I did something I'd never done before.
I broke into Grandpa's study. It wasn't really breaking in. I had a key to every room in the estate. But Grandpa's study had always been sacred space, off limits even to family except by invitation. The room smelled like pipe tobacco and leather, scents so deeply associated with him that for a moment
I could almost believe he was still alive, still sitting in that wingback chair by the window, reading the Wall Street Journal and muttering about politicians who didn't understand trade policy. I sat at his desk, running my hands over the polished wood. What was I looking for? A letter? A confession? Some explanation for why he'd demanded these tests? I started with the drawers. Most contained exactly what you'd expect: pens, paper, files relating to the business, correspondence with various board members and executives. But in the bottom drawer, locked, I found something different. The key was hidden in a hollowed-out book on the shelf, a trick Grandpa had shown me when I was 12, making me promise never to tell anyone else. Inside the locked drawer was a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. My hands shook as I opened it. The first entry was dated May 3rd, 1967. Grandpa's handwriting, unmistakable even 58 years ago, filled the pages with neat, precise lines. Today I learned that love and truth are not always compatible. Sometimes loving someone means keeping secrets that would destroy them. Isadora is 7 years old. She calls me Daddy. She believes I hung the moon. How do I tell her the truth? How do I break her heart? Or mine? Isadora, my mother. I flipped through more pages, my pulse hammering in my ears. She's getting married tomorrow. To him. And she has no idea. I wonder if I should have told her years ago, before it got this complicated. But what good would it do now? The damage is done. The lie has become the life. Evangeline was born today. My granddaughter. Except she's not, is she? Or maybe she is. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. God, I'm tired of these secrets. The journal entries spanned decades, each one a breadcrumb leading to a truth I didn't want to find. They spoke of decisions made in crisis, of lies told to protect, of a secret so foundational that revealing it would topple everything. But the journal never spelled it out completely. Grandpa had been too careful, too worried that someone might find it. The entries were cryptic, emotional, tortured, but never explicit. Except for the last one. Dated 3 months before he died, in handwriting that wavered with age and illness. I'm dying. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. And I realize I can't take this to my grave. They deserve to know. All of them. Especially Evie. She's stronger than the others. She'll survive the truth. Maybe she'll even understand why I did what I did. The DNA tests will reveal everything. Let them hate me if they must. But let them know who they really are. I closed the journal, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. The door to the study opened. My mother stood there, her face drawn, her eyes red from crying. You found it, she said. Not a question, a statement. Mom, what is Grandpa talking about? What truth? She crossed the room slowly, sitting in the chair opposite the desk. For a long moment, she just stared at her hands, those elegant fingers that had braided my hair and wiped my tears and held me together through every crisis of my childhood. I wanted to tell you before the results came back, she finally said. I tried to find the courage. But how do you tell your daughter that everything she knows about herself is wrong? My chest tightened. I don't understand. You will. In about, she checked her watch, 6 hours. Mr. Ashford just called. The results are in. He's coming this evening to reveal them. She looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw a grief so profound it made my own fear seem small. I'm so sorry, Evangeline. For all of it. For the lies, for the life you're about to lose, for the truth you're about to gain. Just tell me, I whispered. Please, whatever it is, just tell me. But she was already standing, already leaving, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. You'll know soon enough, she said from the doorway. And when you do, I hope you can forgive me. If not today, then someday. Because I did what I thought was right, and I'd do it again, even knowing how this ends. 6 o'clock arrived with the inevitability of an execution. We gathered again in the same room where this nightmare had begun, the mahogany table that had witnessed generations of Thorne family decisions, now standing as judge and jury over our fates. Mr. Ashford arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. He set it on the table with deliberate care, his expression giving nothing away. Thank you all for coming, he began, as if we'd had a choice. The laboratory has completed the DNA analysis for all parties, and I've reviewed the results. Before I share the findings, I want to remind you that your grandfather included a letter to be read before the technical results are revealed. He wanted you to understand his reasoning. Just get on with it, Desmond growled. He'd been drinking. I could smell the whiskey from across the room. Mr. Ashford opened his briefcase and withdrew an envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, the same cream-colored stock Grandpa had used for all his important correspondence. He broke the seal and began to read. To my family. If you're hearing this, I'm dead. Good. I've been a coward for too long, and death has finally forced my hand. What you're about to learn will change everything you know about this family. Some of you will be angry. Some of you will feel betrayed. Some of you might understand, though I doubt it. I barely understand it myself. In 1966, I had an affair. My wife, your grandmother, mother, great-grandmother, was dying of cancer. The woman I loved more than life itself was disappearing before my eyes, and I was weak. I sought comfort where I shouldn't have. The result was a child. That child is Isadora. The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked at my mother. She sat perfectly still, tears streaming down her face, making no move to wipe them away. The woman I had the affair with was my secretary, Patricia Hendricks. She died in childbirth. With my wife's blessing, yes, she knew, God forgive me, she knew. We claimed Isadora as ours. We told everyone Patricia was a surrogate we'd hired because my wife was too ill to carry another child. It was 1967. People accepted what they were told. Isadora grew up as a Thorne. She married a Thorne, my nephew, Richard. She never knew the truth. And Richard never knew that when he married his cousin, he was actually marrying someone with no Thorne blood at all. Which means Isadora's children, Evangeline and Emery, carry no Thorne DNA either. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, my breath coming in short gasps. Not a Thorne. Not related to any of these people. My entire identity, my entire history, my entire sense of self, erased with a few sentences from a dead man. Emery made a sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. So we're what? Bastards? Imposters? You're my grandchildren, Desmond said firmly,
though his face had gone ashen. DNA doesn't change that. Doesn't it? Celeste's voice was cold. The inheritance is supposed to go to Thorne descendants. If Isadora isn't a Thorne, if her children aren't Thornes, don't you dare, my mother said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Don't you dare make this about money. Then what is it about? Celeste shot back. Why did he do this? Why reveal it now, after all these years? Mr. Ashford cleared his throat. There's more to the letter. I'm revealing this truth because lies, no matter how well-intentioned, become prisons. Isadora has lived her entire life not knowing who she really is. Evangeline and Emery have built their identities on a foundation that doesn't exist. That's not fair to them. That's not love. That's control disguised as protection. So here is the truth, in all its ugly glory.
And here is what I've decided. The inheritance will be divided equally among all parties, regardless of blood relation. Isadora, Evangeline, and Emery are my family in every way that matters. They will receive their full share. But there's one more thing. The DNA tests revealed something else. Something I didn't expect, though perhaps I should have. Desmond, my son, my heir, the man who has run Thorne shipping for the last 15 years. You are not my biological child. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to stop ticking. Desmond's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, rage, devastation. That's impossible. Mom would never. Your mother had her own affair, Mr. Ashford said quietly, reading from the letter, with a man named James Whitmore. She confessed it to me 3 years ago, when she was dying. She'd carried that secret for 56 years. Desmond is James's son, not mine. Desmond stood up so violently his chair fell backward. This is insane! He's lying! Dad is lying! The tests are wrong! The tests were run 3 times to verify accuracy, Mr. Ashford said. There's no error. Then what the hell am I? Desmond roared. If I'm not a Thorne, if I've spent my entire life building a company I have no right to, His voice broke. He pressed his hands to his face, his shoulders heaving. Celeste was crying now, too, her daughters clutching her hands. My mother had her arms around Emery, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. And I just sat there, numb, watching my family. Except they weren't my family, were they? Disintegrate. There's one more paragraph, Mr. Ashford said, and I wanted to scream at him to stop, to burn the letter, to let us live in ignorance just a little while longer. I know this is painful. I know you'll hate me. But here's what I learned in 87 years on this earth. The truth is the only foundation worth building on. Everything else eventually crumbles. You are all free now, free to choose who you want to be, free to choose your own family, free to choose whether the Thorne name means anything to you or not. As for the company, I've established a trust. The business will continue, managed by the board, with equal profit distribution to all of you. None of you have to work there if you don't want to. None of you have to carry the burden I carried. Be happy. Be honest. Be free. With love and regret, Thaddeus Thorne. Mr. Ashford set down the letter. He opened a folder and began distributing copies of the DNA results. Scientific proof of everything we'd just heard. I looked at mine. Maternal match, Isadora Thorne. Paternal match, Richard Thorne. Genetic markers indicated no relation to Thaddeus Thorne. No relation to Desmond Thorne. No relation to Celeste Thorne. I was a documentary filmmaker, I dealt in truth, in facts, in reality captured on camera. I'd spent my career telling other people's stories, uncovering other people's secrets, and I'd had no idea that I was living the biggest lie of all. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of lawyers, accountants, and reporters. Somehow, this story leaked, probably from someone at the laboratory, and suddenly the Thorne family scandal was international news. Shipping magnate's deathbed revelation, dynasty built on lies. DNA tests reveal none of Thorne's heirs are actually related to him. Family fortune in chaos after genetic bombshell. I stopped reading the headlines after the first few days. They didn't matter. What mattered was the wreckage left behind. Desmond had a complete breakdown. The man who'd run a billion-dollar company with ruthless efficiency couldn't handle the revelation that his entire identity had been a lie. He checked himself into a psychiatric facility in Switzerland. Celeste took his daughters and moved to their vacation home in Aspen, refusing to speak to anyone. My mother stopped leaving her bedroom. I'd bring her food, sit with her, try to talk to her, but she'd just stare at the wall, locked in a grief so profound it scared me. Emery, surprisingly, handled it better than anyone. "I mean, it's weird," he said one night as we sat on the estate's back terrace, watching the sunset over the harbor. "But I'm still me, right? I still like the same music, still want to go to film school, still think Dad's jokes are terrible. Finding out Grandpa wasn't my biological grandfather doesn't change that." "Doesn't it?" I asked. "We spent our whole lives being Thornes. That meant something. We had this legacy, this history, this name that opened doors and commanded respect. Now we're just, what? Random people who happen to grow up rich?" "Maybe that's better," Emery said. "Maybe we get to figure out who we are without all that pressure." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to embrace the freedom Grandpa had talked about in his letter. But freedom feels a lot like falling when you've spent your entire life standing on solid ground. I threw myself into work. I finished editing the Kenya documentary and immediately started planning a new project. I needed to be behind the camera, needed to focus on other people's truths, so I didn't have to confront my own. But then, 4 weeks after the revelation, I got a call that changed everything. "Ms. Thorne? Or should I say Ms. Hendricks?" The woman's voice was elderly, warm, with a trace of a southern accent. "My name is Dorothy Brennan. I was Patricia Hendricks's sister, your grandmother's sister, which makes me your great-aunt, I suppose." I nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, what?" "I saw the news about your family, about Thaddeus's confession, and I thought you might want to know about your grandmother, about Patricia, about where you really come from." She lived in Charleston, in a small house near the Battery. I flew down the next day. Dorothy was 79 years old, sharp as a tack, with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly as she poured me tea. Her living room was filled with photographs, family portraits spanning decades, images of people I'd never met, but whose features I could see echoed in my own face. "Patricia was my baby sister," Dorothy began, settling into her chair with a photo album in her lap. "Smartest person I ever knew. Got a scholarship to Columbia. Majored in business administration at a time when women weren't supposed to do such things. When she graduated, she could have worked anywhere. But she chose Thorne Shipping because she wanted to learn from the best." She opened the album, and there was Patricia. Young, beautiful, alive. My grandmother. The woman I'd never known existed until a few weeks ago. "She fell in love with Thaddeus," Dorothy continued. "Couldn't help herself. He was brilliant, powerful, passionate about his work. And he was lonely. His wife was dying, and he was watching the woman he'd built his life with slip away. Patricia knew it was wrong. She knew nothing good could come of it. But sometimes the heart doesn't listen to reason. Did she know she was pregnant? Yes, and she was going to leave, going to have the baby somewhere far away, start over. But then Catherine, Thaddeus's wife, found out. And Catherine did something extraordinary. Dorothy pulled out a letter, yellowed with age. Catherine wrote this to Patricia. I found it among my sister's things after she died. The handwriting was shaky but elegant. Dear Patricia, I am dying. The doctors give me 6 months, perhaps less. I've had a good life, a full life. But my greatest regret is that I will leave Thaddeus alone. He loves you. I can see it, even though he tries to hide it. And I am not angry. How can I be? Love is rare and precious. I will not condemn it, even when it hurts me. You're carrying his child. Don't deny it. A woman knows. And I want that child to grow up as a thorn. Not in shame, not in secret, but as part of this family, as my child. I know what I'm asking is strange, but I'm asking it anyway. Let Thaddeus and me raise your baby. Let us give that child everything we can, and know that I will love your child as I love my own. You will always be the child's mother, but let me be the mother the world sees. With respect and no small amount of sadness, Catherine. I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face. Patricia agreed. Dorothy said softly, because Catherine asked with such grace, such generosity, and because she knew Thaddeus would give the baby a life she couldn't provide alone. She died giving birth to your mother. Complications. She never even got to hold Isadora. Did she regret it? Agreeing to Catherine's plan? Dorothy smiled sadly. She wrote me a letter, the night before Isadora was born. She said, I'm doing this because love sometimes means letting go. And I love this baby enough to give her the best life possible, even if it means I won't be part of it. That's who Patricia was. Selfless, strong, extraordinary. So here's my question for you, wherever you are right now, watching this story unfold. What would you do? If you discovered your entire life was based on someone else's sacrifice, someone else's secret, someone else's love, would you honor it? Would you resent it? Would you try to understand it? Drop a comment below. I really want to know what you think, because this question, this exact dilemma, is what I faced next. And the choice I made? It determined everything. Dorothy showed me more photographs, told me more stories. I learned that Patricia had been an artist, a pianist, a lover of old movies and new ideas. I learned that the Hendricks family had its own history, teachers and ministers, builders and dreamers, people who'd worked hard and loved deeply and left the world better than they found it. I learned that I came from strength on both sides, that my blood was both Thorne and Hendricks, elite and ordinary, privilege and perseverance. Your mother, Dorothy said as I was leaving. Isadora, I've followed her life from afar. Patricia would have been so proud. Tell her that, if you can. Tell her that her birth mother loved her enough to let her go. I drove back to the airport in a daze. But somewhere over North Carolina, as I watched the sun set through the airplane window, something shifted inside me. Grandpa had been right. The truth had destroyed the life I thought I had. But maybe, just maybe, it was giving me the chance to build something better. I returned to the estate with a plan. Not for revenge, not for acceptance, but for something else entirely. Understanding. I found my mother in the garden, the place she'd retreated to more and more as the days passed. She was tending the roses Catherine Thorne had planted 60 years ago, her hands gentle on the blooms. "I met your aunt," I said, sitting on the bench beside her. "Dorothy, Patricia's sister." My mother's hands stilled. She didn't look up. She told me about Patricia, about Catherine, about the choice they made together. I pulled out the letter Dorothy had given me, Catherine's letter to Patricia. "She asked me to give you this." My mother took the letter with trembling hands. She read it once, twice, 3 times. Then she pressed it to her chest and wept. "I spent my whole life," she finally said, "trying to be good enough, smart enough, perfect enough to deserve the Thorne name. I never felt like I fit, never felt like I truly belonged, and I could never understand why. Now I know. I was trying to be something I wasn't." "You were exactly what you were supposed to be," I said. "Mom, 2 women loved you so much they made an impossible choice. Catherine gave you her name. Patricia gave you her life. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something extraordinary. But I lied to you, to Emery. I knew the truth for years." "You knew?" She nodded, fresh tears falling. "Your father told me when I was pregnant with you." He'd found some old letters between Grandpa and his mother. He confronted Grandpa, and Grandpa told him everything. "Your father wanted to tell me the truth, and Grandpa finally agreed it was time." "And Dad never told anyone else?" "He wanted to, but I begged him not to. I was terrified of what people would think, of what it would do to the family. So we kept the secret. And it poisoned us. Your father and I," her voice broke, "we never recovered from lying to you. It destroyed our marriage. My parents had divorced when I was 15. I'd always been told it was amicable, mutual, no one's fault. Now I understood. The weight of secrets, of lies told to protect, of truths buried so deep they became toxic. It had slowly killed their love. "I'm so sorry," my mother whispered. "For all of it. You deserved better." I took her hand. "You did what you thought was right. That's all any of us can do. Can you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive. You're my mother. That hasn't changed. That will never change." We sat in the garden until dark, talking about Patricia, about Catherine, about the complicated legacy of love and lies we'd inherited. For the first time since the revelation, I felt something like peace. But the rest of the family was still broken. I called a meeting. Mandatory attendance. Even Desmond, who'd just been released from the facility in Switzerland. Even Celeste, who'd sworn she'd never speak to any of us again. We gathered in Grandpa's study, the place where he'd written those journal entries, where he'd wrestled with truth and lies for decades. I'd had the staff arrange chairs in a circle, no table between us, everyone equal. "I know you're all angry," I began. "I know this feels like betrayal. But I've been doing some research, and I want to share what I've learned." I'd spent the past 2 weeks digging into our family history, real history, not the sanitized version we'd been told. I'd found census records, immigration documents, military records. I'd traced the Thorne line back 5 generations. "Thaddeus Thorne was not the man we thought he was," I said. "He wasn't some self-made titan who built an empire from nothing. His father gave him the shipping company. His grandfather gave his father a fleet of ships, bought with money made from some very questionable sources during Reconstruction. Our legacy is built on exploitation, on taking advantage of people who had no power." Desmond shifted uncomfortably. "That was the times. You can't judge." "I'm not judging. I'm providing context. Because here's what else I found.
I pulled out more documents. Patricia Hendricks's father was a sharecropper who worked himself to death so his daughters could go to college. Dorothy became a teacher in segregated schools, fighting for her students' rights. Patricia used her business degree to help Thaddeus modernize Thorne shipping, making it more efficient and more ethical. I looked at my mother. Mom, your biological mother did more to shape what Thorne shipping became than any Thorne did. The profit-sharing program that made the company famous? That was Patricia's idea. The environmental regulations we adopted 20 years before they were required by law? Patricia pushed for those. And Desmond? I turned to my uncle, who looked smaller now, diminished by his breakdown. James Whitmore was a union organizer who fought for workers' rights. He died protesting unsafe conditions in a factory. You've spent your career improving labor conditions at Thorne Shipping. That's not despite who your father was. That's because of who your father was. I stood up, pacing now, my documentary filmmaker instincts taking over. Don't you see? We've been worshiping the wrong things. The Thorne name doesn't make us special. Our actions make us special. Our choices, our values. But the company, Celeste started, the company will be fine. Better than fine.
Grandpa set up a structure that doesn't require any of us to run it if we don't want to. But if we do want to be involved, we get to choose it. Not because we're obligated by blood, but because we care about what it stands for. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I'm not saying we have to forgive Grandpa for keeping these secrets. I'm not saying this doesn't hurt, but I am saying that maybe, just maybe, he gave us a gift. He freed us from the burden of a legacy we didn't earn. Now we get to build our own. Silence. Then Emery spoke up. I think Evie's right. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. And yeah, finding out I'm not a real Thorne sucked. But also, I don't have to go into shipping. I don't have to be some corporate executive. I can study film like I want to. I can be me. It's easy for you to say, Celeste said bitterly. You're young. Your whole life is ahead of you. But some of us have built our entire identities around this family. My daughters have the Thorne name. What do I tell them now? Tell them the truth, I said. That family is more than blood. That love is a choice, not an obligation. That they're descended from strong women who made hard choices, from men who fought for what was right, from imperfect people who did their best. And tell them, my mother added, her voice stronger now, that they get to choose who they become. That's the real inheritance. Not money, not a name, freedom. The meeting didn't fix everything. Desmond still struggled with his identity crisis. Celeste was still angry, still hurt. The twins were confused and conflicted. Emery was cautiously optimistic. My mother was healing, slowly, painfully, but it was a start. 6 months later, I stood at the harbor where Grandpa had taken me as a child. The flagship of the Thorne fleet was being renamed. No longer the Thaddeus Thorne, it would now be the Catherine's Choice, honoring the woman whose grace and generosity had started everything. The entire family had come. Desmond, who was back at work but in a different role, focusing on philanthropy rather than operations. Celeste and her daughters, who were slowly rebuilding their relationship with the rest of us. Emery, who'd just finished his first semester at film school. My mother, who'd started seeing a therapist and was finally forgiving herself. And me. Still Evangeline Thorne, because I'd chosen to keep the name. Not because I was born to it, but because I'd earned it. Because it represented not just Thaddeus's legacy, but Patricia's too. Catherine's. All the complicated, flawed, extraordinary people who'd made me possible. Dorothy had come too, meeting my mother for the first time. Watching them embrace, Patricia's sister and Patricia's daughter, I'd cried like a child. After the renaming ceremony, we scattered Grandpa's ashes in the harbor. It had taken us 6 months to agree on how to honor him, what he deserved after the chaos he'd caused. In the end, we'd decided he deserved exactly what he'd asked for: the truth. He was a coward and a liar, Desmond said as we watched the ashes drift on the water. But he was also my father, the man who taught me how to sail, how to negotiate, how to stand up for what I believed in. I hate him. I love him. I forgive him. I'll never forgive him. He was human, my mother said simply. Painfully, perfectly human. I thought about the journal I'd found in his study, the one I'd read cover to cover in the months since. It painted a picture of a man torn between love and duty, truth and protection, the family he'd built and the secrets that sustained it. The last entry, written the day before he'd gone to the lawyer to arrange the DNA tests, said this: I am terrified of what I'm about to do, of how they'll react, of whether they'll understand. But I'm more terrified of dying with these secrets locked inside me, poisoning everyone I love even after I'm gone. So I'm setting them free. And I hope, God,
I hope that freedom is the greatest gift I can give them. It was, I whispered to the wind, to the water, to the ghost of the man who'd raised me. Thank you. That night we had dinner at the estate. Not in the formal dining room, but in the kitchen, crowded around the old farm table where Cook had worked for 40 years. We ordered pizza. We laughed. We argued. We told stories about Grandpa, the good and the bad, the inspiring and the infuriating. Emery took out his camera, an old film camera Grandpa had given him, and documented it all. For our real family history, he said. No lies, no secrets, just us. Later, I found my mother on the terrace, looking out at the harbor lights. You okay? I asked, handing her a glass of wine. I'm getting there. She smiled, and I realized I hadn't seen her smile, really smile, in months. Dorothy called me yesterday. She wants me to come visit, meet the rest of the Hendricks family. I'm thinking of going. I'll come with you, if you want. I'd like that. She squeezed my hand. You know what's strange? I spent 57 years as Isadora Thorne, daughter of Thaddeus and Catherine, perfect heir to a perfect legacy. And I was miserable. Now I'm Isadora Hendricks Thorne, daughter of 2 women who loved me enough to make an impossible choice, granddaughter of a sharecropper, niece of a teacher, mother of 2 children who are figuring out their own paths. And for the first time in my life, I feel real. Real is better than perfect, I said. Real is the only thing that matters. We stood there in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, connected not by the blood we'd been told we shared, but by the love we'd chosen to keep. Behind us, I could hear the family. Desmond teaching Nicolette how to play poker, Celeste and Gianna arguing about politics, Emery showing Cook how to use his camera. This was my family. Messy, complicated, imperfect, real. And I wouldn't change a thing. 3 years later,
I released a documentary called The Inheritance. It told our story, all of it. The lies, the secrets, the revelation, the fallout, the healing. It won awards. It sparked conversations about family, identity, the difference between blood and belonging. People reached out from all over the world, sharing their own stories of discovering hidden truths, of families built on complicated foundations, of love that transcended DNA. But the best response came from a letter I received 6 months after the film was released. It was from a young woman named Zara, who'd been adopted as a child and had always felt disconnected from her adoptive family. "I watched your documentary," she wrote, "and for the first time, I understood that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. You can choose your family. You can choose your legacy. You can choose who you become. Thank you for showing me that truth isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace." I read that letter to my mother, to Emery, to Desmond and Celeste and the twins. We read it together on the anniversary of the day we'd learned the truth, the day our world had shattered and, eventually, begun to rebuild itself into something stronger. "Grandpa was right," Emery said. "The truth set us free." "Not just free," I corrected. "It gave us the chance to choose who we wanted to be. And I chose this, to be Evangeline Thorne, not because a man named Thaddeus decided it, but because I decided it. To honor the legacy of strong women, Catherine and Patricia, Dorothy and my mother. To tell stories that matter, that reveal truth, that help people understand themselves and each other. To build my family on love instead of lies." That night, I visited Grandpa's grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone was simple. Thaddeus James Thorne, 1938 to 2025. Beloved grandfather, imperfect man, seeker of truth. "You were right," I told him, kneeling beside the stone. "About everything. The truth did hurt. It did destroy the life we thought we had. But it also gave us the chance to build something real, something honest, something worth more than any inheritance." The wind carried my words away, out toward the harbor, toward the ships that still bore the Thorne name, toward a future built on truth instead of secrets. And somewhere, I liked to imagine, Grandpa was finally at peace. Because in the end, that's what the will had really been about. Not money, not legacy, not control from beyond the grave. Just a dying man's final wish, that the people he loved would be free. And we were. God, we finally were. So that's it. That's my story. The story of how a single DNA test shattered everything I knew and rebuilt me into someone stronger. If you made it this far, thank you. Thank you for witnessing this journey. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything? Have you ever had to choose between comfortable lies and painful honesty? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or question or understand, share it with someone else who needs to hear it. Because stories like this, they're how we remind each other that we're not alone. That truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the most beautiful lie. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this. Real stories, honest stories. Stories about the messy, complicated, extraordinary truth of being human. I'm Evangeline Thorne, and I'll see you in the next one.